Good morning. It's Monday the 12th of October and it's time for DaviePHD's Mythbusters, episode 12. Many things are said about Scotland, independence, the Union, the EU, etc. In these videos I bust the myths that many people believe and are commonly peddled by those opposed to independence. This week I'm busting a myth that for some mystifying reason has really gained a lot of traction. It's the myth that the Scottish Government has done a worse job of looking after people in care homes during the COVID pandemic than in England. I've seen many people claim that the Scottish Government policy of moving people from hospitals to care homes was abhorrent and that the resultant death toll is somehow the fault of the Scottish Government. That is actually pretty far from the truth. Everybody loves their parents or grandparents, and the decision to put them into care homes is never an easy one to make. Leaving someone you care so deeply about in the care of another is tough, but it's an unavoidable choice for many, and we should all be able to do so feeling that our loved ones are as safe as possible. As we all know, our care homes were a significant battleground in the war against COVID-19, and sadly, many of our older and most vulnerable people paid the ultimate price for something that was not their fault. And the need to apportion blame is totally understandable in a time of tragic loss. Any change in current circumstances is easy to apportion it to, and the buck doesn't get any higher than the government of the day. But that is an emotional response. In order to assess the situation objectively, we have to look at it mathematically and logically and remove emotion so we can use it as a performance measure. The Scottish and UK governments followed largely the same strategy in dealing with COVID in hospitals, in that they tried to clear as many beds as possible so that wards could quickly be repurposed as COVID wards if the need arose. Both governments returned people to care homes who were symptomatic and in some cases even COVID positive. From the 2nd of March to the 12th of June, official figures show that the following amount of care home deaths from either COVID or suspected COVID. These figures are rounded up. And you may ask why I stopped at June the 12th. That's because figures for England stopped becoming available. So in the interest of fairness, I stopped my comparison there too. Of course, we are talking about two countries here, Scotland and its much larger neighbour, England. The population of Scotland is 5.4 million people, and in England it is 56.3 million. So as a percentage, Scotland has 9.6% of England's population. Care home COVID deaths. In Scotland it's 1,900 and in England it's 22,000. Which gives Scotland 8.6% of England's care home COVID death total. The care home populace in Scotland is 36,000 and in England it's 418,000. Which gives Scotland 8.6% of England's care home population too. The initial glance looks about even. Scotland's care homes have about 8.6% of the population of English ones. So if we were to look at this on a purely fatalities per capita in care basis, then the two nations are roughly equal. So statistically, there's no appreciable difference in the probability of a person losing their life to COVID in either an English or Scottish care home. But if we were sleekit, we could claim it as a positive by being deliberately misleading. By conflating two things that aren't actually related, we could say something like, with 9.6% of England's populace, we've had 8.6% of their COVID deaths in care homes. Now, if you were equally sleekit in viewing these figures from a unionist viewpoint, you could say that a disproportionately large number of Scotland's COVID deaths occurred in the care home sector. Now, let's factor in the whole pandemic. We start from the same figures from the first slides of Scotland's population percentage compared to England. Our overall COVID death figure in Scotland is 2,544 and in England it's 37,823. So that gives Scotland 6.7% of England's overall COVID deaths. In care homes, we've had 1,900 COVID deaths in Scotland and 22,000 in England. If we subtract those from the overall figures, we get a general population figure of 644 for Scotland and 15,823 for England. Which means that in the general population, we have 4.1% of England's COVID death total. So, with 9.6% of England's population, we have 4.1% of COVID fatalities in the general population. So it's actually a fact that you are 58% less likely to die of COVID in the general population in Scotland. And that skews the figures. It is true that a larger proportion of Scottish COVID deaths were in care homes, but that's because our overall measures were more effective at keeping the general population alive. There have been areas where we could have gone down a different route to the UK. Sadly, this wasn't one of them. We followed the same strategy and had the same tragic result. We have been able to be different in some areas, and looking at these statistics properly, i.e. not through the prism of our political opposition or the mainstream media, we're managing the overall health situation more effectively. The fact that over half of Scottish COVID deaths are in care homes was too simple an analogy to use when assessing relative performance, and its use by the Scottish Conservatives was ill-timed, insensitive, and an inaccurate portrayal of the overall situation. Any COVID fatality is one too many. My heart goes out to anyone who's lost a loved one, or who's still sick, but for clarity, I don't blame either government, either Scottish or the UK, for this situation. When leading a nation, our leaders have to make tough calls at times. In situations like this, it sadly becomes a numbers game. If a leader can get the maximum amount of people safely through it, they will have done well. Those leaders have to be emotionally detached from the decisions they make so they can make them as effectively as possible. Now, I don't think the term doing well is appropriate, but when this particular area of COVID response is analysed properly, like I just have, it's clear that the Scottish Government are doing just as well, or perhaps just as badly as our neighbours. It will be scant comfort to those who have lost a loved one, but they would have been no less at risk in an English care home than in a Scottish one. Now, it's time for me to have a bit of a rant. I'm just an average person, just like you. I'm not a whole political party with paid researchers like our opposition. I've not done anything startling here, just some simple arithmetic. I'm sure that Mr. Carlaw and latterly his replacement Mr. Ross know this. They should know the true picture, but have made a conscious choice to spin it to make the Scottish Government, the Health Secretary and the First Minister look bad. I'll bet nobody expected to see these guys pop up in one of my presentations, but the comparison is very valid. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Joseph Goebbels, Nazi Minister for Propaganda. This attack line was crass, untrue and uncalled for, but taking a leaf straight out of the Joseph Goebbels strategy guide, the Tories know that if they repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. Sadly, the Scottish Government didn't challenge this strongly enough, and even worse, some independence campaigners have bought the lie. The whole truth of this is that our effectiveness in dealing with the overall situation has kept the general population more than twice as safe as those in England. And that has skewed the figures if viewed simplistically with no in-depth analysis. I'm supposed to finish these with a positive, but in this case I can't. It disappoints me that in the Indy movement, which is usually so intelligent and so well informed, which is usually so positive and full of hope, that so many of us Indy campaigners have bought a Tory lie using a strategy straight out of a Nazi playbook. We're better than this. We're better than them. If you are one of those Indy fans who's turned on the government on this issue, I want you to go find a mirror. Take a look into it and have a fucking word with yourself. DaviePHD.